to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is the f7 square and the sacrifices on that very square. As we know, it's pretty famous that the weakest point, especially in the opening for both sides, are on black side the f7 and on white's the f2 squares. And there are very common sacrifices even at the early stages of the game on those very squares. So in this lesson, I would like to share with you some amazing famous examples exactly on that theme. And now I'd like to start with the first example, which was played by no other than the famous magician from Riga, Mikhail Tal. Here is the position that was reached after the first 20 moves of the game, and it looks like a pretty wild and crazy position, kind of a bit typical from Tal's games. Well, we can see that white is the one a pawn ahead. However, we have to admit that it looks rather scary with the white king walking around in the middle of the board on d2. In addition, the white bishop on b4 is hanging. Black is about to give a huge fork with knight f2, so there seem to be a whole lot of issues going on all at once, and also the black rook is about to come to d8 to check us. Nevertheless, with all that said, it is white who is having the upper hand here, but of course only if they find the correct continuation right here and right now. And well, with the hint I already gave that our topic in this lesson is the weakness of the f7 square, it's not hard to imagine what white should do next. And white is ready for action, and namely to sacrifice right on f7, sacrifice the bishop. Well, in this case, if the king moves out of the check, of course the rook would be hanging on e8, so as typical, the test of a combination is if the other side accepts the sacrifice. So let's see what happens after the king captures the bishop on f7. Well, white better continues with powerful and active and ambitious moves. So the next one is to find the right check. White has several checks at disposal, but the best and most logical one is to move to d5 with the queen. And the reason for that is because at this moment the black king has no way out. The only option of defense black has is to block the check. So the point is that the queen doesn't only attack black's king right now, but keeps an eye on the rook in the corner as well. So after black's only move, which is to block the check with rook e6, now white has the option, various options, to check on d7, which is not a bad choice at all, or alternatively to do what they did in the game, worked pretty well, play queen b7 check. Now the story is pretty sad for black. If the king moves back to the 8th rank, then the queen will not only capture the rook, but it will arrive with a check, gaining further time for furthering white's attack. On the other hand, after black continued by blocking the check with the rook, naturally this leads to immediate material gain as well, with queen capturing the rook, and really white's advantage is rather clear at this point, but I'd like to show you the rest of the game as it involved still some interesting tactics. Black continued with king g8, and white gave yet another check, forcing the black king to the corner. And now the white bishop is still hanging and the white king is still in a delicate position, so white has to be kind of still accurate in how to continue. And white played smartly by playing queen c4 right now. The point of the move is real simple: protect the bishop on b4, and we can notice that the black queen is in a very sensitive position at the moment. In fact, the white rook is about to go to b1 to trap the queen. Even if, for example, black right now will respond by playing a5, trying to chase white's bishop to rescue black's queen out of the trapped position, white would simply go after black's queen, and then when black would attempt to sacrifice the knight and get the queen out and then trying to attack white's king, which is in the middle, then white can do better than just capturing that knight on e5 by simply playing queen d5. And as we can see, the black queen is still in a trapped position on b2, and black is in a hopeless position because on top of everything, even the rook in the corner is hanging. So let's go back and see how the game continued after white's move of queen c4. So now black in the game immediately played knight e5, sacrificing the knight, but this now leads to white having a full extra rook in the position, which is obviously a humongous advantage. Nevertheless, white still has to be careful because their king is still out there without much defense in the middle of the board. So the next move is very important, playing c3 and opening up an escape route on c2, which is importantly a light square, so the black bishop has no access to it. Came a5, and at this point white could play in various ways. Playing bishop c5 would be fine as well. White chose queen c6, an intermediate move attacking black's rook. Black responded moving the rook away simply to b8, and white played smartly rook he1, bringing the rook into the game, immediately attacking black's queen. Black checked, king c2, queen checked again, and now, even better than moving the king out, block the check. White is more than happy to trade queens, and even though white would give back some of his material advantage after the trade of queens, but nevertheless white would remain with sufficient material advantage. Black responded with queen c8, trying to keep the queens on the board, and of course here there are many ways to win, including just moving the bishop to e7, but white chose a very impressive way to end the game, a fancy way, by playing rook d7, putting the rook on pre, and with the idea that if the queen now captures the rook, then queen e5 check would come, forking black's king and rook, and the game would end real soon. Black in the game captured the bishop, but this allowed a forced checkmate with a famous ladder pattern, moving up one square at a time, kind of climbing the ladder, and now to f6, and then to f7, and then finally checkmate on h7. One of those rare examples in grandmaster practice when a game actually ends in checkmate. Well, now after this historic game by Mikhail Tal against Grandmaster Szabo, let's see our next example from the practice of the Armenian Grandmaster Vaganyan. And in that game, this position was reached after only 9 moves into the game, and it was white's turn to do something special. Well, it's unusual that at such an early stage we're ready for action, ready for a combination, but this is one of those examples. And that is one of the reasons why I suggest it's rather important to familiarize yourself with various patterns, because the more patterns you're aware of, the more likely it is that if you'll have a similar situation, you will be able to apply that to your own game. Many players in such a situation would make like a kind of a natural move, such as castling, or maybe moving the queen out, or something like that, leaving black the opportunity to recover from the tactical blow that actually white has at his disposal at this very moment. As you know, our theme for this lesson is the weakness, the sacrifices on the f7 square. So obviously this is a huge hint. So by no surprise, white played bishop to f7. As usual, if black ignores the sacrifice or moves out of the check without capturing the bishop, white would simply win material, and it's clear that it's a success for white. So the question really is, what happens after black accepts the sacrifice? As typically, a sacrifice as such needs to be followed up by a powerful move, typically a check. And most often it would come from the a to g8 diagonal, just like in the last example. Here it comes with queen b3. And now the black king is in a difficult situation. If it would try to go to g7 to hide, or to f8 for that matter, white would be ready immediately to fork and pretty much end the calculation, as white would be remaining with significant material gains after capturing black's queen. So really the only question remains how to continue if the king goes to the e file, to e7 or e8. First, let's check out what happens if the king goes to e7, which is not the move that happened in the game. Then white could of course play queen e6, but even more powerful would be to play knight g6 check, which is a fork attacking the king and the rook. King moves to d7, and now white continues the offense with queen f7 check. Let's say the black king tries to remain hiding as much as it can. Problem is, it won't hide too long because knight e7 arrives. King goes back out to d7, and now a very pretty move, a combination, knight c6 check. Of course, this is a discovered check, which at the same time attacks the black queen. However, the catch is that black can capture that knight. But there is a cost to that, namely the fact that the black king is forced out more and more out towards the middle of the board, which, as we know, rarely ends well. So the chase continues, queen e6 check, and queen d6 blocking it, d5 chasing the king further out. Now of course white could already play knight e4 winning the queen, but can do still better chasing the king out further, b4. King captures, queen e4 check, and the chase continues. King captures c3, and the rook gets into the game. King b2, queen b1, king a3, and queen b3. Game over. What a pretty line. Well, let's go back to the beginning stages of this game, where after queen b3 in the actual game, black responded with king e8. Now, if white would continue with a natural queen e6 check, the problem lies in the fact that black will block, and after the exchange of queens, and now after capturing on g6, even though white will gain material temporarily by capturing the rook, the problem is the white knight will not get out of the corner. The knight will be trapped right there, and the game is not so clear at all. So therefore, let's go back all the way to the position after the second move from where we started, and white continued better than that, did not give the check with queen e6, but continued capturing on the g6 pawn first. Now the black rook is under attack and it's in trouble. If the rook moves up to a safe square, an immediate fork arrives with queen g8, so that's not a real solution for black about his own rook. Or, of course, if black would right now play king d7, so after knight takes rook the queen could capture back, we would see a similar ending to the game as we saw in the last line after queen f7. The game instead continued by black playing after knight takes pawn on g6, Black responded with queen d7, giving up on the rook, however with the hope that after knight captures, the black queen will trap the knight. However, that's wishful thinking, it wasn't really happening. White plays queen e6. Now if black queen would block the check, then of course after the exchange of the queens, the white knight would be easily getting out of the corner. If black would play king d8, then after knight f7, black would have no choice but to give up the queen for the knight. So the only reasonable move here would be to play king f8, which black played in the game. And now white can bring a new piece to the attack by playing knight d5. A powerful move with the idea that if now comes queen h8, then queen e7 check followed by knight f6 would lead to huge gains for white. Black played knight d7, the developing move, and now white has another elegant move by playing knight d7, putting the second knight also on pre, but the catch is that if either knight would be captured, the other knight would move to g6, forking black's king and queen. And of course, with this move, white prepares the escape of the knight in the corner to g6, and white's win is no doubt. The game ended again with checkmate, with black capturing the pawn on g2 and allowing queen f7. A very elegantly played game by the Armenian Grandmaster Paganyan. And now let's move on to our next example, which has been reached by another former world champion, namely Boris Spassky, against the German Grandmaster Flager. Again, what we see in this position is a normal position when seemingly things are having a more positional style of play than anything else. However, just like in our first two examples, white has a special combination at his disposal. And let's see how white continued right here and right now. Well, white continues with our usual sacrifice, bishop f7. King captures, and now came queen h5 check. For a change, the check comes from a different diagonal than we saw in the first two examples. Now the check came from h5. And now black has two reasonable looking choices. One is to block the check, which black continued in the game, or the other one is to try to move to f8, which would be protecting the rook on e8. Now white would continue by playing queen takes pawn on h7, and at first it seems that, well, but where's the threat? Well, the threat is the peaceful knight jump to f5. And interestingly, black really does not have any good defense against it. For example, if black would trade rooks and then after that play queen f4 with the idea to respond knight f5 with queen g5, the problem is that after check, a second check will arrive with the rook, king g6, and now the simplest win is knight h4, forcing black to give up the queen. Let's go back again and see another option that black may have. After queen h5 and king f8, queen h7, if black does not trade rooks, but the queen immediately appears on f4 with the same idea to defend, then white would play knight f5, queen g5, and now as the e7 square is still guarded by the rook, then white would check, and now not rook e7 but knight d6 and simply win the rook on e8. So in reality this is not really a good option for black, as we could see. So let's go back to this position and see how the game would continue, or rather did continue, in the game after g6. Well, white was ready for action and captured the pawn on h7, forcing black's king down. And now white has a pleasant choice. White would have a strong attack also after capturing the pawn on g6, but Spassky found something more original, more creative way to continue the attack, namely to play h4, a very brilliant move with the idea to next simply play h5 to lure away the g6 pawn from controlling the f5 and h5 squares, and then to appear with our knight just like we saw in the previous variations. The beauty is that there isn't too much that black can do about it. The game continued with black playing queen d6 right now, and white was ready for action with h5. Now if pawn captures, then it's full success. The white knight arrives to f5, not only attacking black's queen, but of course also threatening to checkmate right away on g7. So therefore pawn takes on h5 is very easily refuted. So after h5 in the game, black continued by trading rooks on e1, and so continued white capturing on e1. Another problem is that if black does not capture on h5, white will have the pleasant choice on capturing h takes g6 or even pushing to h6 with a winning position, depending of course on black's response. Playing rook e8 is also out of question because of queen h8 check. Black played knight e5, which temporarily solves issues in closing up the e-file, but it has a serious cost, namely a knight. So white just captured a knight, pawn captured back, pawn captured on g6, threatening with immediate checkmate on f7. Black has tried to defend against that, but with this move allowed a different checkmate right in the corner. Well, as we could see, it was another brilliant example on a bishop sacrifice on f7. And now let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. Well, this is an endgame position from a composition by Van den Ende, which is pretty surprising, as you shall see. Well, you need to remember that if one side has two knights against a lone king, it's still not sufficient to win. However, sometimes the opponent's extra pieces can become a problem, can stand in a way. Now, if you think of capturing black's rook right away, you'll see the problem is the white rook is also hanging. So without any further hints, I suggest you try to figure out how can white win this game. Then come back and check if you got the right solution. Well, I hope you enjoyed figuring out this amazing puzzle, and here is the answer to it. The correct first move is to play knight c5 check right now. After this move, the black king has two options: either to go to d5, in which case white would simply capture indeed the rook, because now it's with a check, and then if king c5, then white would also capture the knight, and of course the material advantage is significant and white would win easily. Let's go back to the beginning and see, after knight c5 check, what happens if black responds with king e5 right now. Now again, same problem. If knight takes rook on f6, black also will take the white rook. So therefore the correct move here is to check with the rook. Again, if the black king moves, white will be ready to capture the black rook on f6 with a check. If now the black knight blocks the check, then white will play knight d7 check and just win the rook. End the game. But the question is, what happens if black blocks the check with the rook? Even though the white knight right now can capture the rook, then the black knight will capture back, and black will have sufficient material for white's extra rook, having an extra knight and two pawns. And now comes the pretty part. White is ready to trade rooks instead of winning an exchange. Normally, such a material balance, in fact black is the one having two extra pawns, Black would be in no danger of losing whatsoever. However, because of the very unfortunate and unusual positioning of the pieces on the board, White is ready to checkmate in 2, and I really love this end. Check, King d5, and a beautiful, brilliant checkmate with White's knight on e7. You can see the brilliant position with the 4 knights right next to each other, and it's game over for Black. Well, I hope you truly enjoyed this beautiful duel of the week, as well as remember a bit more about the pattern of bishop sacrifices on f7. Thank you for listening, and so long until next week. Bye bye.